All right, we seem to have tapered off on the rate at which people are joining, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to talk about today. I'd like to welcome all of you to Future-Proofing Your Parcel Shipping Blueprint with ProShip, Invista, LPF Spend Management, and Label Master. Before we get started though, let's talk about a little bit of housekeeping. This is going to be relatively interactive. As you can see all four of us today. We look forward to answering your questions and talking about the industry. And of course, many of you have given us questions as you registered, but if questions come up during, we really want you to go ahead and use the controls that are available. Go ahead and ask questions. We've got a team of personnel behind that will be trying to push those questions up to us as we go forward. Worst case scenario, we'll try to answer them at the end. In the meantime, there are handouts as well. So you can get a lot of information from what we've already posted up here for you. So you can go ahead and pull those down and use as necessary. All right, and today, with us on our panel today, we've got Kristen DePore, Nate Skyver, Michael Falls, and myself, Justin Kramer. And let's go ahead and let's let each of them introduce themselves and their companies individually. Kristen, would you like to introduce yourself and Label Master?
Sure, thanks Justin, and thanks for having me. I'm Kristen DePore, the Director of Business Strategy for Label Master Software. I've been with Label Master 11 years now, and we are basically the go-to source for anything related to dangerous goods. Our products division has over 30,000 different products, all to assist with shipping the goods. We have a consulting division as well that's supported by industry experts who have very hands-on experience within the warehouse, and they work extremely closely with the governing bodies to stay ahead of the curve of any changes that are happening in the industry. And then the one near and dear to my heart is, of course, the software division, which we work directly to assist the shippers in validating and ensuring compliance with each package, either from our UI or from integrated partners such as ProShip, the work behind the scenes.
Excellent, thank you, Kristen. Nate, can you go ahead and introduce LPF Spend Management?
Absolutely, thanks, Justin. So my name is Nate Skyver, founder of LPF Spend Management, which is a parcel and e-commerce delivery consulting company. Before starting LPF in 2019, I spent 17 years in retail, which was largely focused on parcel transportation and e-commerce. And that's really the foundation of LPF's consulting services, which we focus largely on parcel contract optimization and carrier diversification. And in this pricing environment, the commoditized FedEx and UPS rate negotiation process is pretty difficult. And so we focus on a detailed evaluation of alternative carriers to make sure that the carriers and services that are sourced align to a client's shipping strategy. So in addition to consulting through LPF, I also publish frequently on LinkedIn. I really am passionate about parcel and e-commerce and industry, and try to share knowledge in that way. So if you follow the industry, if you're interested in e-commerce delivery and parcel, then I would appreciate it if you give me a follow, because that's what I try to do is update the industry as best I can.
Excellent, thank you, Nate. And Mike, could you introduce yourself and Invista?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justin. And before I introduce myself, I can validate what Nate is saying. Everything that I'm going to share in my presentation today, I learned from Nate Skyver on LinkedIn, following him. So just want to throw that out there. Great follow.
Thanks, Mike.
Michael Falls here. I'm Director for Global Strategic Solutions with Invista. Invista, if you're unfamiliar with us, we are a leading global supply chain consulting and software solutions firm. And for the last 20 years or so, we have been helping organizations across the globe with everything ranging from transportation spend management and supply chain system selection and implementation. And recently are gaining a lot of traction with our proprietary unified commerce solution, which is a point of sale and order management system. So we truly are end-to-end supply chain consulting and software. Now, my area of focus and what I've really been focused on for the last 8 years is within our global freight audit and payment solution. It's called MyShipInfo. And my area of focus has really been primarily around transportation business intelligence, analytics, and integrated finance solutions. So we're working with retailers, distributors, manufacturers, 3PLs all across the globe, everyone from Williams-Sonoma and Urban Outfitters on the retail side to AmerisourceBergen on the distribution side. And again, thank you so much, Justin and team, for letting me participate in the conversation today. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Mike. All right, and I'm Justin Kramer, co-founder of ProShip. ProShip is a small parcel multi-carrier shipping software. We do LTL as well. We really are, we do specialize a lot in retailers. As you can see, we've got a large number of the NRF top 100 retailers, but we also work a lot with 3PLs, manufacturers, basically anybody who is doing B2B or B2C shipping in the small parcel region. Excellent. And with that, we're going to talk a lot today, so we're going to be pretty jam-packed. Like I said, we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. We have pulled in questions from those of you who entered them during your registration, so we'll talk about those as well. But we're going to talk about the state of the market. We're going to go through peak season 2021 expectations. We're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, how we're going to record data, the ever-present labor concerns, omni-channel fulfillment, dangerous goods shipping. Make sure you're not going to be in trouble this year. Carriers, and of course, then we're going to try to leave some time for our attendee questions and answers. So I encourage you to go ahead and enter those questions anytime you see fit. To start off with, though, let's talk about the state of the market. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move it over to Nate. Nate, could you let us know what are we looking at right now in 2021?
Well, I think, Justin, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it really comes down to really, really high demand from a parcel volume standpoint. Capacity that's been increasing, but not at the rate of demand for sure. And then the most obvious result, at least that shippers have felt, is continuous rates increasing from a carrier perspective. And so to dig in a little bit further on the volume side, I think everybody's highly aware of the explosive growth from 2020 with e-commerce, but also package growth. And there's a report that Pitney Bowes released in September that cited a 37% package volume growth in the U.S. In 2020 over 2019, reaching 20 billion packages in the market. And that growth rate, of course, has moderated this year as has e-commerce, but in the second quarter, we were still at 9.3% year-over-year growth for e-commerce over 2020, which was a massive jump in the baseline metric there. And looking forward, or at least, well, I guess current estimate in November, December, so the holiday period of this year, is Adobe expects that increase to be 10%. And so it's definitely slowed, but we're talking about an increase of e-commerce revenue, and it's highly correlated to package volume that is still very much elevated, certainly compared to 2019. And the biggest challenge I think we've seen in the market since last year, for sure, has been capacity from a parcel carrier standpoint. And depending on who you ask and where you get your information, there's been a number. Actually, UPS CEO Carol Tomé back in June cited a 5 million package per day shortfall that was expected in 2021, shortfall of capacity compared to demand. And so that situation where we kind of got behind last year in capacity, we haven't caught up yet. And that's despite all the major carriers, FedEx adding capacity. They've opened several new ground facilities, had a lot of expansion of and automation of existing facilities as well. So they're really pursuing additional volume in that way. UPS has taken a bit of a different approach, not as much of a physical expansion or capital investment as much as it's been in technology, as part of their better not bigger strategy of trying to be more efficient. Looks like it's working, but as far as net capacity added, I don't think there's been a tremendous amount at this point. USPS has tried to recover from a challenging 2020 overall, but certainly in the fourth quarter. And they've done that to the tune of over 3 million packages per day capacity processing. And regionals, we've seen several regionals add service areas. They've increased volume or rather capacity within existing footprints. But all that said, and that's not even mentioning new entrants, which we'll talk about, all that said, there's still a deficit here. And I think what that has done then is really facilitated a pricing environment, particularly for FedEx and UPS, that is incredibly favorable for them. And the way that we've seen that in the market is, shippers have been dealing with continued rate increases. And so since June of 2020, there's been peak surcharges in place, which is interesting because peak used to mean close to Cyber Week until maybe Christmas, and that's no longer the case. So it's a bit of a misnomer there. So those have been in place for 18 months. There is no end in sight at this point. And added to that are we'll call them repricing of accounts. And UPS and FedEx have been very, transparent about that, in that they're going through, they're determining profitability or margin on accounts, and where they deem appropriate, they're increasing rates. And oh, by the way, we've got a general rate increase that takes effect here before too long that is higher than the average used to be of 4.9%. UPS and FedEx have theirs effective at the end of December and beginning of January, and that's an average of 5.9%. And most, I think, certainly customers of those carriers realize or have experienced that actual impact on their spend is going to be higher. There's a lot of surcharges, so wouldn't be surprising to see a lot of shippers experience 8-10% or more of an impact. And so being in that situation, shippers, I won't say they don't have a lot of options, but directly with FedEx and UPS, there aren't very many as far as negotiating. And leverage wasn't necessarily strong 18 months ago, but it's definitely lower than it was from a shipper perspective. And so what that's done, I think, is done a couple things. One is it's forced a lot of shippers to consider alternative carriers to FedEx and UPS, which is a good thing. I think just as far as stimulating some competition at some point. And they've done that to try to mitigate some of this rate, increased expense risk and operational risk from capacity constraints. And I think that will continue also. There's an opportunity to evaluate new entrants into the market. So there's a few listed here, just a few of the very, very many. Pandion, the Front Door Collective, Airterra. So there's a lot of focus in this area of parcel delivery, a lot of investment, a lot of innovation, and that brings, I think, opportunity for shippers to diversify their carrier base.
Excellent. And Nate, we ended up with two questions here. The first one is from Siva Logistics. Once peak is over, do you see the parcel carriers backing off some of the new increased accessorial charges that have been added over 2021? So is this something that are we gonna be out of this next year, or what's your take on that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's the short answer. And I think I'll just focus on FedEx and UPS for the moment. They've been very clear, and there's a couple of quotes here that support it from both carriers. They are going to have surcharges, if you call them peak surcharges, in place until there are conditions to where they can't, basically, to where they can't substantiate it and get the revenue per piece lift that they are right now. And so the conditions I don't see materially changing in 2022 to where peak surcharges certainly don't go away. We'll talk a little bit more about it. I think there might be some opportunities to leverage some of those new entrants to create some competition, but overall in the market, I don't see it having a big impact in reducing even the amount of those surcharges.
Okay, and we've got a live question here that came in from Hempstead Consulting. Given the lack of need for new business or even maintaining deep discounts, what is the strategy to get the duopoly to grant deeper discounts? And does a shipper put his or her deal at risk by putting a book of business out to bid and drawing attention to the margin on a deal? Okay, so that's kind of a compound question there, but I think that it was a pretty timely question. If you need to bid now, should you? You know?
It's a great question. There's a lot that goes into it, and depending on the situation, of course, if there's a pending expiration on a portion, say even of a national carrier's contract, and you're in a situation where you do need to bid business, then I think there are ways to be more specific with the volume that you are willing to award to those carriers. So FedEx and UPS have been they've been doing this before kind of the volume increase in the pricing environment they've been trying to push volume out of their network, be it oversized, lightweight, or issue rate increases and surcharges to incentivize basically some customers to move that volume out. And if they don't, then they've got their margin. And honestly, I think in some cases, and this is kind of isn't the most well-known approach, is to give them what they want. It is to provide them with the volume that best fits their network. There has to be a certain amount of transparency between both parties, which is challenging, and move volume elsewhere. I know that sounds really simple. The second part of that, I think, question was about compromising discounts. That's a much longer explanation. The short answer is absolutely, that may compromise discounts, but I don't think that point only and focusing and starting there of trying to fit everything into an existing FedEx and UPS agreement is really the right way to approach it. I think it needs to be a holistic approach of determining what the transit time goals and objectives and expense objectives and targets are for an entire program for a retailer, and then determining how to source it. And it's not exactly that easy, but that's the approach that I would recommend. It's not as much a try to fit in what you can to the UPS and FedEx program. That's what many retailers have done for years, and now it's becoming less and less effective.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and I'm going to follow on to your question while our audience answers the poll. And the poll is about what pains are you currently facing in your current state of shipping? I think that not too many people are going to be surprised by the results of this poll, but we definitely want to understand. And I just wanted to follow up with if you are trying to provide one of the national carriers with a particular type of parcel, a particular type of shipment, you're definitely going to make sure that your enterprise software stack is set up, whether it's your WMS, whether you have dedicated shipping software, whether you're using a full-blown TMS. You want to make sure that you're set up so you can provide that sweet spot to whatever carrier, whether it's a national carrier, one of the newer regionals, in order to meet that need. All right, so looks like people are continuing to answer. I'm going to give this another 30 seconds or so as the answers are coming in hot and fast, and then I'll present the results so everybody can see, audience as well. And of course, that might affect what you all are doing. All right, another 15 seconds, and then we will go to the results. All right, and with that, I'll close the poll and we will share the results. Okay, and I don't think a surprise to anybody here that more shipping capacity is the #1 concern, followed by labor and inventory. I'm amazed that nobody was pushing for more sales, and it looks like 17% of our audience is very lucky, as these are not their concerns. All right. Before we move on, panel, any comments on any of those things? Pretty much saw what we expected to see.
I'm a little
Okay.
surprised the 17% with none of those issues. I think
I
that
was surprised.
17% should talk to the other 83% and see
Well,
what they're doing there, because
yeah, it could be they just have a larger issue, maybe a software issue, something like that, right?
yeah, maybe.
I was just shocked that nobody wanted more sales, because that's
Well, I think,
as a sales guy,
one
that's
thing
fine.
that, yeah, I
Go
mean,
ahead,
one
Mike.
thing that may have been missing from the list is the pressure to manage costs, right? And so for, I think, a lot of shippers, obviously the capacity is one component, but from the shippers that we're talking to, that aspect of the pressure to manage cost while still keeping the promise of delivering to customers on time, that's as much pressure as anything.
Excellent. And Mike, you know what? It is the next slide goes to you. We are looking at peak season 2021 expectations. You guys collected a lot of data. Let's go ahead and share with our audience what you guys are expecting for peak 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nate did a really nice job of kind of framing up where we are today. And a lot of what Nate shared really helped us understand throughout the year as we were collecting data, as carriers were making different announcements about the surcharges that we could expect and the changes in their costs, the changes, from a labor perspective, even on things like quarterly reports. We kind of had a pretty good indication of what peak season would look like. What maybe wasn't expected so much is how carriers would actually change the rules of the game and actually take, to a certain extent, diverging paths as we headed into peak season here. So really the three categories I would take a look at to this regard would be around delivery time, on-time performance, around cost management, and then really even around billing technology specific to the UPS front. So the graphic you're seeing here is data pulled from our business intelligence application around on-time performance for FedEx and UPS. And I don't want to pick on FedEx to any regard, but it's no secret that they've had challenges operationally from a technology perspective, from a labor perspective, that have influenced their ability to deliver packages on time. UPS hasn't had as many of those challenges. Now, Nate outlined some of the reasons why when they are deciding to reprice agreements and actually force volume or even force customers out of their network. That's part of what's helping support their broader customer base. But we know that delivery time, far and away, the poll just showed it. I read a Wall Street Journal article yesterday that also talked about how consumers are, 3 out of 5 consumers are willing to abandon their brand loyalty as a result of the risk of a package being delivered late. So we know what's at stake here, and we know that supply chain professionals are the promise keepers to this regard. But when it comes to actual delivery commitments, FedEx and UPS, as many people know, really had delivered their guaranteed service from the beginning of COVID through the middle of summer 2021. So really a 15-month period where there was no guaranteed service on any service level commitments. Over the summer, UPS and FedEx both announced guaranteed service would return on some service commitments. So some express next day commitments and some international service levels. Heading into peak, however, beginning in November, FedEx announced that they would be suspending all guaranteed service, even on the service levels where guaranteed service had been reinstated. Now, in any other peak season, that would be an indicator that UPS would be, a few days or a few weeks behind in announcing the same. But to date, UPS has not announced any suspension of guaranteed service on those express and international service levels. And really, that's an indication that they feel very confident about their ability to continue to deliver packages on time at a much higher rate than they would have, we would have even expected earlier this year. You can even see from the graphic, again, real data here. Beginning of this year, FedEx was outperforming UPS in many cases when it comes to on-time percentage. And now the gap has really widened in UPS's favor, again, depending on service level. So one thing UPS did do, they did change the definition of next day service. They basically delayed the time commitment from 10:30 to noon, but again, guaranteed service is still in place. Now, on the cost management side, this is a little bit more straightforward. We have seen a number of surcharges being announced, especially from kind of outside of the duopoly of FedEx and UPS. We've seen new peak surcharges for regional carriers. We've seen peak surcharges for DHL. DHL actually announced a surcharge that really threw a lot of shippers off because it was dimensionally based for peak, and where a lot of shippers had actually made some decisions to move volume to DHL. The new surcharge actually changed the cost model so that now the packages were 2 to 3 times more expensive than projected based on that dim factor. So the peak surcharges, the fuel increase in fuel costs, 1 to 2 percentage points, which can really be an increase in 10 to 20% of total fuel spend. And then, as Nate mentioned, the higher than expected GRI, or at least higher than traditional GRI, which at 5.9% for UPS and FedEx really translates to a lot more than 5.9% unless you've got a great rate cap in place. So that's really, kind of what was unexpected on the cost side. What was really interesting, I know I haven't intended to pick on FedEx a little bit, stating the facts around delivery times might lend itself to seem that way, but I'll come full circle back to UPS here and really talk about some of the changes they made, especially to their billing technology that
Actually, before we move on to billing, let's finish up with costs for a second here, because there are other costs that are associated, and there are also we got a question from one of our viewers about how to get those costs into the systems. And I want to just answer very quickly. In some cases, those costs need to be manually entered. In others, they need to be a business rule if they are based off of how much you shipped in the past. Okay, so you do need to work with your multi-carrier shipping software provider to ensure that they understand how the carrier is applying these new costs that Mike was talking about to you. But there's also one other cost. As we all look at as retailers, as direct-to-consumer shippers, and sometimes even B2B, we are looking at more and more things that can be considered dangerous goods. Kristen, could you jump in here and let us know what kind of dangerous goods surcharges are we seeing this year?
Yeah, Justin. So Nate and Mike have both hit on these surcharges. Just between FedEx and UPS on the dangerous goods, hazardous material front, we're seeing a 13 to 14% increase on all delivery services. So it doesn't matter if it's going next day or whatever it might be, it's across the board. And this is causing a huge impact on customers. Traditionally, over the past 3 or so years, we've seen an average of a 5 to 6% increase. So this is double that going into 2022, and customers are already trying to figure out what they can do about it.
Okay, so and then Mike, on top of all of these charges, we've got a carrier that's having billing problems.
They are, although admittedly they're getting a little bit better. What I'll try and make this concise. I mean, what UPS did is they released their long time coming new online billing center for basically UPS invoice payment for shippers kind of across all modes and services. And they were having trouble actually posting invoices on time. So when they launched the new billing center, whereas shippers would traditionally be able to come in on a Sunday or Monday and have access to their bill that had been posted with an invoice date of Saturday, now it could be midweek before they were able to gain access to their bill. Now, you would think that UPS might make some concessions around the late payment fees that are in place and extend terms for those shippers who are impacted, but they did not. So not only were bills delayed, which means decreased visibility to shippers to actually make operational adjustments based on the data, but now also there are late payment fees that are coming through as a result of the disruption in the invoice workflow. So shippers, if you're not working with a small parcel auditor today, make sure you're really keeping a close eye on any late fees that might be coming through if you're a UPS shipper, and really contesting those, especially if you were impacted by those billing center disruptions. The last thing I'll say, I mean, that really does tie in with other technology, I'll say, challenges that UPS presents to its customers. One of those is that with the change to this new billing center, they actually made it harder to file for guaranteed service refunds. So if you are guaranteed service eligible, even though UPS has extended that guaranteed service throughout peak on next day and international, it's now harder to file. And UPS, as always, is actually generating its invoices based on the labels that were printed for most of its shippers. There are some shippers who have moved to kind of a delivery scan based billing model, but typically UPS is billing for every label that gets generated, which means you've got to keep a close eye on labels that were printed but not used, because you will get charged for the projected costs of those shipments based on the manifest. So again, if you're not working with a parcel auditor like Envista today, keep a close eye on those costs as well.
Warehouse managers, make sure your personnel are avoiding those shipments. Nate, did you have anything to add to the carrier changes this year?
One thing I think, just real quick, back to Michael's initial point on the guaranteed service refunds. It's interesting because FedEx and UPS are taking different approaches, but back to let's say pre-pandemic volume, holiday period is normally a period where both carriers have an extended time where that money back guarantee is actually not offered, or it's not offered for 4 or 5 weeks. And so that's actually, I mean, there's a lot of metrics right now, not just in parcel, but in e-commerce and retail, about, comping not last year, but 2019 as a better baseline. So it's kind of interesting to see, essentially FedEx just went back to business as usual, but UPS, save for the challenges in filing the refund request, have actually taken a step forward from a customer standpoint. So kind of interesting to see that. I think that's probably it, Justin.
Excellent. All right, moving on then, because we are a little behind. Mike, we're back to you again with recording data. Again, this is near and dear to my heart, because if you don't know what happened, you have no idea why it happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm really going to get into the what here, not so much as the how. My assumption here is going to be that my assumption is going to be that you are able to leverage data to a certain extent to actually impact your current and future shipping costs. If you'd like to learn how to do this, don't feel like you've got a good handle on kind of wrapping your arms around all of the data that might be available across your supply chain systems, let's have a conversation after the discussion today. But if you've got good access to your data, I want to arm you with some very practical ways that you can actually monitor controllable spend in 2021 peak, right? It's not too late to do a few things that are going to make an impact. So the 5 categories I've got here are around accessorials, packaging, vendor compliance, internal compliance, and then actual cash flow management. The graphic at the bottom is really around the accessorial trends. Keeping an eye on those accessorial trends specific to each of the individual charge types is so key. I'll give you a really practical example. We're working with a large omnichannel retailer who we recently discovered had printed all of their return labels out of a specific distribution center with an incorrect address. It wasn't totally wrong, it was just 1 digit off. And what that meant is that this shipper was being hit with an address correction fee on every single return that was coming back to that distribution center. So we were able to discover this within the first week of it happening because of the data we were monitoring in the business intelligence. But that's so key, is to keep an eye on any outliers in your data and understanding, where there are shifts in your spend, so that you can understand operationally, really what's driving that. With box sizes, it's keeping an eye on handling an oversize. From a vendor compliance perspective, it's really doing vendor level scorecarding to ensure that vendors are using the right service levels, not driving up your costs by using, expedited spend maybe where it's unnecessary, or using box sizes that might be dimensionally weighted just because the vendor's not using, the right box sizes. So really doing the analytics around those areas. From an internal compliance perspective, I'll be honest, sometimes this is where the biggest bang for your buck is. Just monitoring something like next day early AM shipments for intra-company, where there are certain operators within the company who think I've got to get something from point A to point B quickly. Sometimes it's the mailroom, and they're just driving up costs through next day expedited early AM. So keeping an eye on that. And then from a cash flow management perspective, again, especially when we've got these truncated windows, everybody's busy right now. Everyone's trying to manage cash flow, but also from an invoice processing time perspective, there can be disruptions within companies' financial organizations. And so keeping an eye on late fees, especially if companies are trying to hold on to cash and wait a longer period of time to actually pay their invoices, you've got to figure out what's going to be the impact of the downstream late fees to those decisions. So we can kind of move on to how to actually leverage data now for 2022, because as much as there are certain areas that you can still really control your costs within 2021, or at least mitigate the impact, 2022 peak success really does start now. And in terms of kind of where you can start looking for opportunities to make adjustments, what I've got here in the table, number one, it's really around evaluating your delivery times by carrier, by service level, and by lane. And the three graphics here all tell this story. These are 3 graphics for a customer of ours. You can see on-time percentages for UPS and FedEx. And at the aggregate level, the on-time percentages are actually trending higher than what we see for our typical customer base. But if you start to break this down a little more closely, you see bottom left, this is actually on-time percentage by service level. So most of the service levels outside of ground are arriving with pretty poor on-time performance. And to the bottom right, you can see that for a specific segment of customers, specifically in the Pacific Northwest, that customer experience is poor right now as well. And so aggregate level information does not tell the story. And as you looked at 2022, using the lessons learned from the data from 2021 can help you figure out, how do I source my carrier options? Maybe how do I leverage a multi-carrier shipping solution partner? How do I budget for more expedited service in different regions? So that's really, that's the most important thing to be evaluating right now. I already touched on that second one, spend by charge type. Figuring out, how am I going to budget for different charge types next year? How am I going to make operational adjustments next year, similar to what you potentially could do right now? How do I hold carriers accountable? True story, there was a FedEx, actually, for one of our customers. There was a charge type that one of our customers had a waiver for in 2021. FedEx actually changed the name of the surcharge. So they applied the same surcharge, same rules, same business rules, but they changed the name so that they didn't have to enforce that surcharge waiver. And so you've really got to keep an eye on those types of things. And then last but not least is profitability by SKU. Having a SKU or a product level match so that you can really be a strategic internal business partner for your company and be able to come back to your company at the beginning of next year and say, hey, these particular products actually cost more to ship than we gain in revenue. We've got to make some strategic decisions that can really elevate, kind of your strategic internal partnership. So all of that to say, in order to do this, you've got to have great business intelligence. When I say business intelligence, I don't mean dashboards. Dashboards aren't going to get you to where you need to go. Nate, you and I were at Parcel Forum a few months ago. Justin, you were there as well. Everyone's got what they're calling a BI tool. And the reality is that most quote unquote BI tools are not intelligence, they're information. So really evaluating your own product, whatever you're using to aggregate and take action upon your data today, and evaluating that in light of the other options in the market is so key, because frankly, you can't achieve your strategic objectives of delivering to your customer on time and eliminating non-value added spend unless you've got the right product to help you make it happen.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so we are running a little behind, so I'm going to keep moving us forward. Our poll did say that 25% of you are concerned about labor. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is, of course, we all know automation, we all know printer applicators and a lot of conveyor and all those things can help mitigate that. But there are other concerns in labor challenges as well. And Kristen, I'd like to start with you about one of the things that I'm always concerned about, because of the fact that pretty much anything with a battery now is a dangerous goods. A lot of beauty products now are, if you ship them air, they become dangerous goods. There's a lot of rules associated with that can as we talked about earlier, can lead to some hidden costs. So could you talk to us a little bit about how we can better utilize our labor around dangerous goods, and what some of those dangerous goods might be that might surprise us?
Sure. Yeah, everybody's running into labor issues. I mean, we hear it every day, multiple times a day, around employment numbers, and so many people are quitting their jobs, but nobody's able to hire. And this is especially true within the warehouse. So many customers are trying to determine the best way to ensure that there's a smooth peak season and then beyond peak. Oftentimes this is looking toward system efficiencies and automation to take some of the load off. So whether that's smaller shippers who have had no TMS or WMS solution in place at all, so they're looking to implement those. For the DG portion, looking for a dangerous goods solution. DG professionals are not easily found. There are not a lot of us around the industry. And so oftentimes when you're hiring somebody for that position, you also have to train them, which then causes that lag to be even greater of your hiring point to get them up to speed with all of the training and appropriate certifications before they can actively start packing those boxes and producing the paperwork. And so having and finding the right folks in this difficult time is just the hardest part. And Justin, you brought up batteries. At the change of the year, it will be effective in March. One of the biggest changes is that they're doing away with Section 2 for standalone batteries, which was the least restrictive way to ship a battery. And every standalone battery is going to have to go fully regulated, which is going to have a huge impact on the industry, as well as that labor piece of all of a sudden, you're going to have to get some additional training for your team members to make sure that you can get those batteries out the door.
What's my risk here? So let's say I don't, let's say I'm shipping batteries standalone normally, and I've been following all those rules. Now they've all changed. What are the fines? How do those actually work out for me? What's it? I'm a business guy. I gotta do some risk analysis here.
Sure.
What am I risking?
Yeah, so we see all kinds of fines. The lowest level that we see is between $400 to $500, and that's solely for a certification issue, a training error if you don't have it ready to go.
So if I put a battery in a box and ship it the wrong way, since I'm not certified, boom, my company could get a $400 fine.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And then in looking at the package, usually the minimum there is around $1,500, and that's for one package. So depending on how many items and packages of hazmat you have going out the door, that's incorrectly marked, paperwork isn't exactly in order, or your inner packagings, whatever it may be, it can be $1,500 a piece.
That adds up pretty quickly. I do know that I watched in the late 2010s some of the industry news stating that Amazon was racking up $250,000 worth of dangerous goods fees every month or quarter or something insane like that. Yeah, so those can really add up pretty quick.
Yeah, you have to be really careful with that too, Justin, because some of the carriers have a 3 strikes you're out. And so if you get too many issues with shipping them, they will no longer let you ship dangerous goods.
Oh, and that I think that's what we all don't need right now, is another carrier telling us they won't pick up any of our packages. All right, let's keep moving along. Mike, I'm back to you on omni-channel fulfillment. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we need to look at. Everybody is trying to get as close to the customer as possible. What kind of intricacies are you guys looking at, seeing the data that you guys are seeing nowadays?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first point I would make is just that it's not enough to have your carrier billing data and rely on that for your analytics. There really needs to be an integrated supply chain systems approach that allows you to really view all of your costs and do all of your analytics at a channel-based level. And so, particularly for folks on the call who work for an omni-channel shipper, what we typically are doing, call it best practice scenario, is we're integrating carrier billing data with a company's ship from store solution, their PO management solution, obviously their outbound warehouse data, 3PL data, drop ship data from vendors. We're pulling in all of that, aggregating, matching it together on a common data element. And then that way, all of the channel level visibility is available for that shipper from a business intelligence and analytics perspective. So again, screenshots from our business intelligence application here, being able to evaluate cost per package by channel, right? It's not enough to understand that your costs are rising. You've got to be able to understand where are they rising, within which channel, and then drill in from there to really get answers to the questions. Again, I mentioned this bottom left, profitability by SKU, right? Really understanding at an inventory level, where are there opportunities to actually drive out products or increase the cost for products, especially around shipping and handling, or just product cost in general, that may be more costly to ship depending on the fulfillment channel than are achieved in revenue. And then to the right, and this is really my favorite to chat about with the ProShip team, with whom we have a great strategic partnership, the suboptimal service level utilization. There are just so many instances we're seeing in the data where a shipper is, shipping product, let's say 2-day service, because the commitment to customers is that it will arrive in 2 days. But when you actually look at the data for zones, call it 2, 3, and 4 shipments, packages actually arrive more quickly by shipping ground or home delivery, or pick another service level that would cost 2/3 as much, or in some cases half as much, depending on your negotiated discounts. So really being able to leverage the data at the channel level to make smarter business decisions to achieve your objectives is so critical.
Excellent, excellent. All right, let's keep this moving here. We're going to try to catch up a little bit. Kristen, we're back to you on dangerous goods shipping. Could you tell us, I know we focused down and we did a little gloom and doom there on $250,000 in fines, but what are we actually looking at, and how does a validation software help protect us from those astronomical numbers that we were talking about before?
Sure. Yeah, Justin, you were hitting on some of those items that are considered dangerous goods that, nail polish, perfume, things within the house that most people don't think of. My favorite one lately is milk. So if you're shipping that in large quantities, it's a marine pollutant and can kill all the fish if it were to be in an incident. But out on the road every single day, just within the United States, there's 1.4 million DG shipments. So I think this little sector that I live in, the Label Master team lives in with ProShip and a lot of our customers, is quite bigger, a lot bigger than people imagined. I also have the image there of the inside of a delivery truck after a lithium battery fire. Doesn't look so pretty. You can imagine some of the other items on that truck may have been destroyed as well. So the main part when you're shipping dangerous goods is just to ensure that you have awareness of the products that you're shipping, and that all of that information is obtained up front before you even get it into the warehouse or put it out for customers to purchase. Having that data, ensuring the data is accurate, is critical to ensuring success of shipping those dangerous goods, as well as going back to some of the costs, seeing if there are accepted quantity or limited quantity exceptions that you can ship under for those products to avoid some of those surcharges that we're seeing this 14% increase on over the next year.
And I want to make sure our audience understands that all of this functionality can be put behind your shipment execution piece, whether it's a WMS, whether it's a dedicated small parcel shipping solution. And this means that you've got that extra belt and suspenders to help those personnel who have been trained. And I got to tell you, I know quite a bit about dangerous goods. Again, not certified. But I was quite taken aback by the fact that standalone batteries are changing next year, which will be quite a difference for a lot of people. Okay, well, Kristen, thank you very much for that. I'm going to try to keep us moving on, as we do expect to go over a little bit. So continue to put your questions in. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. But let's go ahead and let's look at the carriers that we've got available here. And Mike, I think this one goes back to you. You got a lot of information to share with us here, and I'm sure Nate will chime in on some of this as well.
I think this one's actually mine, but
sorry, Nate.
I'll just take it from here. No, this actually was prompted from a question that we received in advance, and the question was around whether or not the increased competition in the market, which I'll talk briefly about here in a moment, in 2022 would influence the pricing environment and start to shift that back toward the shipper. And I think my short answer to that is no, not in 2022. I don't think we're going to have this like watershed moment where all of a sudden it's an intensely competitive pricing environment and FedEx and UPS have to price volume competitively just to maintain or gain new business. I don't think that's going to happen for quite a long time. But what is happening is there's a lot of activity in this space from new market entrants. So there's investment being made, a lot of money being raised. There's expansion, as we mentioned, from capacity of existing providers, and there's also acquisitions happening. LaserShip acquiring OnTrack, American Eagle acquiring a carrier in AirTerra. So there's a lot of activity, and that does bring about a lot more, I think, solutions that are alternatives to FedEx and UPS, alternatives to single sourcing, or even providing the majority of a shipper's volume to one of those two carriers. So I think there's two things really that will drive the pace at which the pricing dynamics might shift a little bit. One is how quickly those new solutions or existing carriers can scale. So how quickly can they scale? How quickly can they add capacity? I think maybe just as important or more important is retail shippers' adoption of those solutions. So we talked earlier there in an answer to the question about how to approach UPS and FedEx in negotiating contracts, not compromising discounts. If you start there, you're probably not going to move much volume away from UPS and FedEx. So I think it honestly is going to take a mindset change from many shippers to explore alternative options very intentionally to meet a very specific part of their program needs. That once that happens very frequently and that starts to gain momentum, then maybe FedEx and UPS, I don't know if it's in 2022 or not, start to lose business when they didn't mean to. Right now, they don't have to do that, or they do have to compete a little bit more on rates. That's when that will happen. I don't know that it's going to happen in 2022. I think we're headed that direction. We'll see it more, and then into 23, I think that's when we'll start to see more in the market broadly the impact.
Excellent. All right, I've got one last poll that we want to launch. Okay, and then we are going to move into the question and answers. There is still time to get your questions and answers in. The final poll is in 2022, which supply chain initiatives are you planning on researching or implementing? So there's a couple of options here. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that, a lot of initiatives that companies may want to take as there's been such a rush on the technology stack during the pandemic here. So, whatever you guys are looking at, let's go ahead and throw some things in here and see what we've got. All right, the answers are starting to pour in. I'll go ahead and give it at least a full 60 seconds, if not a bit more, so that everybody can put down their coffee and get the votes in. All right, in about 10 more seconds. And all right, let's go ahead and see what results we got out of this. Okay, so it looks like a lot of business intelligence is going to be added, and then continuing in second place at 44%, replacing parts of the enterprise software stack. We've seen a lot of that this year ourselves, and onboarding carriers takes third. So a lot of good information there. Lots of very useful things. And let's go ahead. I'm sorry, I forgot to advance the slide here. Let's go ahead and we're going to start answering some of the questions that were asked. during it. And in the meantime, I'm going to throw this slide up. If you want to contact any of our panel members here, please do. I'll leave this up for the remainder as we start to go through the Q&A. All right, so one of the questions we got is from TransImpact. What impact do you think the acquisition of OnTrack by LaserShip will have on the two big carriers, UPS and FedEx, relative to pricing and competitive environment? And I think that, Nate, I'm going to definitely throw this one to you, but I want to give my own opinion here first. I think I'm going to say it just simply, time will tell. Most important to those of us who want to provide stability in the industry, immediately, nothing will change. So your systems will continue to function as you'd expect. Nate, let me go ahead and let you go forward with some of the speculation.
Oh, I think that was a great intro there, Justin. I agree as far as not just on the systems piece of it, but as far as the market impact, I don't see a significant impact next year from a rate perspective or the competition, which we just talked about. I think that's going to take time. There may be, maybe there's some opportunity for, especially some larger, shippers that either work with both or one of those carriers, that you can start to get some programs in place to take advantage of having the networks on. It's not just the coasts. Obviously, LaserShip covers more of that East Coast and Midwest, to be able to utilize the network a little bit more. But I think it really depends on the approach that LaserShip/OnTrack takes. I think there's speculation. Of course, the immediate one is to continue to acquire additional carriers to quote unquote fill in like service area gaps. Chicago would be a good example, Texas, Dallas area as well. But even with that, the overall capacity in the market, I mean, and this is taking nothing away from those carriers, is still very small. And even within their coverage areas, it's material to the market, but it's not something to where that acquisition all of a sudden means that they are 18 months from being a head-to-head competitor at scale with FedEx and UPS. There's a lot of work to be done to do that. And so I think 2022, I wouldn't expect a lot of really much impact in the market, broadly speaking. I think some customers may benefit from working with those carriers. Maybe 2023, we start to see a little bit, but I think as you opened, Justin, time will tell.
Time will tell. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next one. All right, so there's a question about software functionality to manage carrier volumes, i.e. capping a carrier's daily basis. Good multi-carrier shipping software can do what we refer to as carrier volume balancing. We do recommend that you talk to your account manager as necessary to look at carrier volume balancing. And it kind of goes into what Nate has said. There's only so much you can push off of a particular carrier. We are hoping that not only as carriers are being added to multi-carrier shipping software, but also as their capacity improves, you can shift more and more off there. But the concept is referred to as carrier volume balancing, where as much of the day as possible, you want things to rate shop because you want the lowest cost possible. But as soon as you start to get close to a boundary, and actually, I'm sorry, I have a slide for this. As soon as you start to get close to a boundary, we want to actually remove the carrier that is at that boundary from your rate shop groups. It still tries to provide the best price within the remaining carrier services, though it may not be the best price if you could rate shop that now out of bounds carrier as much as possible. All right, the next one, how can 3PL companies best leverage regional carriers? This is by Saddle Creek. Anybody, I'm just gonna throw that one out here now. 3PL companies and regional carriers.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I mean, I think not unlike retail shippers, which we talked about, a little bit already, is that intentionally evaluating regional carriers, alternative carriers, and aligning what they do best, which is usually a very competitive, ground service. Some of them even, they'll have, next day local ground, is where you have, a high amount of demand, certainly within a coverage area in proximity to a facility, is evaluating those regional carriers to determine if that service aligns with what your customer, your client transit needs are. And, I think it's also something to where for quite a long time, we've had, I want to say, a handful or so of maybe well-known or very well-established regional carriers. That list is growing significantly. Justin, I think you all have probably onboarded a couple dozen or more of carriers this year. And so I think that's the other thing that I would say is don't kind of just stop at the surface level of 5, 6 or so. But there are multiple carriers usually, available in a certain coverage area. And so explore those deeply as well and determine which of those best meets your needs.
Yeah, and Nate, you're right. Even people that I know from other multi-carrier shipping companies, we're adding more carriers in the last 2 years than some of us had carriers before that. ProShip started the pandemic with just over 100 carrier engines, and we're well over 150 carrier engines now with a backlog of 42 carrier engines. So it is the number of options that are out there are important. I think that to talk about something you mentioned earlier, it is going to be interesting to see who can actually get the customers and grow fast enough to maintain those customers. We have seen some consolidation in the market. We have seen some companies exit the market. So when it comes to onboarding these new carriers, yes, we all want more capacity, but I think that we need to, as a group, make sure that we're onboarding the carriers that, if possible, your multi-carrier shipping system already supports it, your WMS already supports it, whatever the case may be there. But also one that is that has shown that they're going to be in it for the long term. Okay, because as soon as we're done with all this capacity, we will be looking at the option of and you've got it on your slide here. We're going to get back to the same day needs. We're already seeing them, at least from the ProShip side. We're already seeing a larger and larger request from customers on same day, and more same day options starting to appear, because there is still not a national one size fits all same day carrier out there. And what we consider in the small parcel world to be the nationals, they're not exactly covering everything themselves, though UPS did buy Roadie, which may help them grow even further. So yeah, lots of things here. All right.
Yeah. One quick thing to add, specifically since the question was geared kind of towards how can 3PLs best leverage regional carriers. One thing that we see all the time in specifically billing data from regionals is that it doesn't necessarily match the quality and breadth of the data from the larger national carriers. And so especially for a 3PL who is probably looking to invoice back to your customer, depending on what data availability you need in order to do that, that's something to really ask, either obviously ask the carrier, but also if you have a partner like a freight audit and payment solution where you can ask, what does that data typically look like? What does that integration process look like? That can be really key for understanding, especially from a 3PL's perspective, what's the downstream impact going to be for your customer as well.
Excellent, excellent. And with that, I think we're going to answer all the questions we're going to answer today. We're sorry for anybody who didn't get your question answered, but I'd like to thank Kristen DePore from LabelMaster, Michael Falls from Invista, Nate Skyver from LPF Spend Management, and I am Justin Kramer from ProShip, and we'd like to thank you as our audience for attending. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.